1974, October, New York City. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a charity gala for the Metropolitan Opera. The room filled with Manhattan's deepest pockets, old money families, legendary conductors, and one man who wore a tuxedo better than anyone else in history. Frank Sinatra. He had accepted the invitation because he had always respected the opera, viewing his own breathing techniques as a cousin to the great bel canto tradition. But some people in that room were uncomfortable with his presence, especially one person, Maestro Vittorio Moretti, 68 years old, a conductor known for his tyranny over the orchestra and his absolute disdain for popular music. That night, Moretti took the podium to accept an award for his lifetime contribution to the pure arts. He adjusted his glasses, looked out over the sea of diamonds and black ties, and locked eyes with Frank. With a glass of champagne raised in a mock toast, Moretti spoke words that were wrapped in velvet but struck like a dagger. The ballroom fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Frank Sinatra, the man who had conquered the world, the man who had just returned from retirement to prove he was still the king, sat frozen. In that moment, to Moretti and his circle, he wasn't the chairman of the board. He was just a saloon singer, a man who needed a microphone to be heard, a crooner with no real technique. But then something unexpected happened. Before Frank's bodyguards could even tense up, a voice rose from a table near the kitchen. A young voice, shaking but determined, interrupting the great maestro. And what she said would change the temperature of the entire room. But the real shock was yet to come, because Frank Sinatra was about to respond to that humiliation, not with a fist, and not with a joke. He was about to do something that would strip away the glamour and reveal the raw, undeniable machinery of his talent. He stood up, unbuttoned his jacket, and walked toward the stage. From that moment on, the definition of voice in that room would be rewritten forever. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? But this story doesn't begin on that tense October night at the Plaza. It begins 5 weeks earlier, in the quiet, dusty silence of a rehearsal room in Los Angeles. Frank Sinatra is struggling, not publicly. Publicly, he is the returning hero, the main event, the man who is back to reclaim his throne after a brief, restless retirement. But privately, he is fighting a war with his own instrument. The voice is there, but it feels different. The top notes are heavier. The breath, that legendary underwater lung capacity that allowed him to sing long, seamless phrases without a gasp, feels shorter. He is swimming laps every morning, holding his breath until his lungs burn, trying to recapture the iron control he had in the 1950s. He hasn't told his family, hasn't told his conductors. Only his mirror knows the look of fear that flashes across his face when a note wavers during warm-ups. Frank is a perfectionist in a world that is becoming increasingly messy. Rock and roll has taken over the charts. The elegance he represents is fading, and he is terrified that he is becoming a nostalgia act, a museum piece. During this period of intense self-doubt, the invitation arrives. A gala supporting the preservation of Italian opera in America. Frank's instinct is to decline. He's in rehearsals. He's tired. He doesn't want to put on the tuxedo and play the part of the gracious celebrity for a room full of people who think My Way is a pop ditty compared to Verdi. But the cause tugs at his heart. His mother, Dolly, loved the opera. His father, Marty, sang the old Sicilian songs in his tavern. Frank has always credited his phrasing to listening to Jascha Heifetz on the violin and the great opera singers of the past. He decides to go, not for the applause, but to pay respects to the roots of his own art. He accepts against his better judgment, against the nagging rasp in his throat that morning. He accepts because Frank Sinatra never runs away from a room. even if he doesn't feel like he belongs in it. Now, to understand the tension that would explode that night, you need to understand Maestro Vittorio Moretti. Moretti was a purist of the most dangerous kind. Born in Milan, trained at La Scala, he believed that the unamplified human voice was the only direct line to God. He despised microphones. He called them crutches for the weak. To him, crooning, the intimate conversational style that Frank perfected, wasn't singing. It was whispering. It was cheating. In 1965, when Frank was on the cover of every magazine, Moretti gave an interview to an arts journal where he famously said, "Take away the electricity, and these pop singers vanish. They are ghosts made of wire and speakers. A true artist fills the hall with his own blood and breath." He never mentioned Frank by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Moretti resented that while he struggled to keep his opera company funded, Frank Sinatra could snap his fingers and sell out Madison Square Garden. He saw Frank not as a colleague, but as a vandal in the temple of music. So when Moretti saw Frank's name on the guest list for the opera gala, he didn't see a guest. He saw a target. An opportunity to prove, once and for all, the superiority of the true art form over the commercial trash of the American songbook. The night of October 20th, 1974, Frank arrives at the plaza. He looks immaculate. The tuxedo is tailored to the millimeter. The patent leather shoes reflect the chandeliers. He moves with that famous, prowling grace, greeting friends, kissing hands, ordering a Jack Daniels, 2 fingers, 3 ice cubes, water splash. But those who know him well, really well, can see the tension in his jaw. He's clearing his throat more than usual. He's avoiding loud conversations to save the vocal cords. He feels like a prizefighter entering the ring with a hidden injury. The gala begins with the usual pomp. Arias are sung, speeches are made about the sanctity of culture. Frank applauds politely, genuinely enjoying the music. He loves the discipline of it. He watches the tenors, analyzing their diaphragm control, respecting the work. Around 9:30 p.m., it is time for the keynote address. Maestro Moretti takes the stage. The room offers a respectful, cultured applause. Moretti adjusts the microphone stand, looking at it with visible disgust, as if it were a dirty rag. He begins his speech, talking about the purity of Puccini, the grandeur of Rossini. And then he pivots. He looks down at the table where Frank is sitting. "We live in an era," Moretti says, his voice dripping with condescension, "where technology masks mediocrity. We celebrate those who whisper into machines, who need engineers to make them sound like men. We have forgotten that the true measure of a singer is not how many records he sells, but whether he can stand naked, metaphorically, before an audience, without the electronic tricks that fool the masses." The room goes cold. It is a direct, undeniable slap in the face to the most famous man in the world. People shift in their chairs. Some look at Frank, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the table flip, the angry exit, the famous Sinatra temper. If you love stories about legends who face impossible odds, subscribe for new stories right now, because we are just getting to the part where the chairman shows the world what he's really made of. Frank doesn't flip the table. He doesn't shout. He just stares at Moretti, his blue eyes turning into ice. He knows that if he gets angry, he proves Moretti right, that he is just a rough street kid from Hoboken who doesn't know how to behave in polite society. But the insult burns. It burns because it touches on Frank's deepest insecurity, the fear that maybe, just maybe, he is a creation of the microphone. That without it, he is nothing. The silence stretches, agonizing and long. Moretti smiles, thinking he has won, thinking he has exposed the emperor's new clothes. And that's when the voice from the back of the room speaks up. That is not true. Everyone turns. Standing near a service door is a young woman, perhaps 22 years old. She is wearing a simple black dress, clearly not a wealthy patron. She looks like a music student, perhaps hired to turn pages for the pianist or help with the seating. Her hands are trembling, but her chin is up. "Excuse me, maestro," she says, her voice gaining a little strength. But volume is not the only measure of art. Intimacy is art too. Mr. Sinatra doesn't use the microphone to hide. He uses it to tell the truth. He sings to one person, not the back wall. That is harder than shouting. The room gasps. A nobody, a service worker correcting the great Maestro Moretti. Moretti laughs, a dry, cruel sound. "And who are you, my dear? A fan club president? Groupie? Please, leave the discussion of music to the musicians. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." The girl flushes red, tears welling in her eyes. She starts to sit, crushed by the weight of the room's judgment. And that is the moment Frank Sinatra decides he has had enough. He can take an insult to himself. He has taken them for 40 years. But he cannot, will not, watch a civilian, especially a young kid standing up for him, get bullied by a snob in a tuxedo. Frank stands up. The movement is slow, deliberate. He buttons his jacket. He touches his cufflinks. He walks towards the girl first, not the stage. He stops in front of her, takes her trembling hand, and kisses it gently. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asks, loud enough for the room to hear. "Sarah," she whispers. "Sarah Miller. I study at Juilliard." "Well, Sarah from Juilliard," Frank says, his voice creating a warm circle around them, ignoring the rest of the room. "You have more class in your little finger than that bum on stage has in his whole body." "Thank you." Then, Frank turns to the stage. He walks up the stairs. The silence is absolute. Moretti steps back, suddenly realizing that he might have awakened a sleeping lion. Frank walks past Moretti. He doesn't even look at him. He walks to the pianist, a hired session player who looks terrified, and whispers something. The pianist nods, his eyes widening. Then, Frank walks to the center of the stage. He looks at the microphone stand. The crutch. The electronic trick. He grabs the microphone stand and moves it. He doesn't just push it aside. He picks it up and places it at the very back of the stage, behind the piano, turned off. He walks back to the center of the proscenium. He is now standing completely unamplified in the vast cavern of the Plaza Ballroom. He is 58 years old. He has smoked packs of cigarettes a day for decades. He has abused his voice with whiskey and late nights. The room waits for him to fail. They wait to hear a thin, rasping sound that won't reach the third row. Frank nods to the pianist. The first chords ring out. It's not a jazz standard. It's not "Fly Me to the Moon." It is "Cor Ingrato," Ungrateful Heart, the Neapolitan song of heartbreak and betrayal that requires immense breath control and open-throated power. Frank takes a breath, that deep underwater breath he practiced in the pool, and begins to sing. Katari, Katari. The sound that comes out of him shocks the room. It is not the croon they know from the radio. It is a dark, rich, resonant baritone that hits the back wall of the ballroom with physical force. He isn't whispering. He is projecting. He is using the mask of the face, the diaphragm, the classic bel canto technique he learned from his mother and refined over a lifetime of secret practice. He sings the Italian lyrics with a passion that transcends language. He is singing for his father, Marty. He is singing for the young girl, Sarah. He is singing to prove to Moretti and to himself that the instrument is still there. The song builds. It requires a climb to a high note, a climax that demands total commitment. Frank approaches the phrase. He can feel the strain in his throat, the scar tissue of age. but he pushes through it, using the pain, turning the grit into emotion. He hits the high note and holds it. He holds it while looking directly at Vittorio Moretti. The sound fills every corner of the room, unamplified, raw, human. It is the sound of a man who has lived 1,000 lives, pouring them all into a single vibration of air. If you are feeling the power of this moment and want to see more legends vindicated, please subscribe for new stories so we can keep bringing history to life for you. When he releases the note, he doesn't gasp. He lets it taper off into a perfect, controlled silence. For 3 seconds, nobody moves. The room is in shock. They thought they knew Frank Sinatra. They thought he was a style, a swagger, a suit. They forgot he was, first and foremost, a musician. Then the applause explodes. It isn't polite opera applause. It is a roar. People are on their feet. The diamonds are shaking. The aristocrats, the conductors, the critics, they are standing. Sarah, the student from Juilliard, is weeping openly, clapping her hands raw. Frank stands there, sweating slightly, his chest heaving. He gives a small, simple bow. No showboating, just the acknowledgement of a job done. He looks at Moretti. The maestro is pale. He looks like a man who has seen a ghost. Moretti gives a stiff, jerky nod. A surrender. He knows he has been beaten at his own game, on his own turf, by the man he called a fraud. Frank walks off the stage. He doesn't stop to talk to Moretti. He walks straight back to Sarah's table. "You busy later, kid?" he asks. She shakes her head, unable to speak. "Good. Grab your coat. You're coming to Jilly's with us. I need someone who knows what the hell they're talking about to have a drink with." That night at Jilly's, Frank's favorite hangout, was legendary. Frank sat with Sarah and his inner circle, telling stories about the old days, about learning breath control by swimming underwater laps, about watching the opera singers at the Met in the 40s to learn how to stand. He treated the Juilliard student like an equal. He told her, "Don't let the snobs get you down, kid. They know the notes, but they don't know the music. The music is in the feeling. If you don't feel it, it's just math." Sarah Miller never forgot that night. She didn't become a famous soloist, but she became one of the most respected vocal coaches in New York. For 40 years, she taught her students that technique is the servant of emotion, not the master. And on the wall of her studio, she kept a napkin from the Plaza Hotel, signed by Frank. To Sarah, keep singing the truth. Francis Albert. But there is a shadow to this story. A secret that Frank took to his grave. That night at the Plaza, when he hit that high note in Cor Ingrato, he felt something tear, a tiny microscopic strain in the vocal cord. The adrenaline masked it at the time, but the next morning, he couldn't speak above a whisper. He spent the next 3 days in total silence, scribbling notes on pads of paper, terrified that he had blown his voice out for good just to prove a point to an old man. He hadn't. The voice came back, but it was a warning. It was a reminder that the instrument was mortal. Frank Sinatra continued to perform for another 20 years. He sang in stadiums, arenas, and casinos. He used the microphone because it allowed him to be intimate, to be the storyteller he wanted to be. But he never again felt the need to prove he could sing without it. He had done it once, when it mattered, when a young girl needed defending and a bully needed silencing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the chairman's life, make sure to subscribe for new stories. We have so many more hidden chapters to reveal. Maestro Moretti retired a few years later. His opera company slowly faded as he refused to modernize, refused to adapt. He died in the late 80s, largely forgotten by the general public. But it is said that in his final years, whenever Frank Sinatra came on the radio or television, Moretti would not turn it off. He would sit and listen, perhaps remembering the night a saloon singer taught him a lesson about the power of the human heart. The Plaza Hotel ballroom is still there. The chandeliers still sparkle. But few people know that in 1974, it was the site of a duel between the old world and the new, between technique and soul. Frank Sinatra proved that night that he wasn't just a product of electricity, he was a force of nature. He showed that true class isn't about looking down on others, it's about lifting them up. He lifted Sarah up that night, and in doing so, he lifted himself above the critics who never understood him. There are no recordings of that specific performance. It wasn't televised. It wasn't on the radio. It exists only in the memories of the people who were there. But the legend remains. The night the voice went unplugged. The night the chairman of the board went back to his roots and showed the world that underneath the tuxedo, the money, and the fame, he was still just a kid from Hoboken who could sing the phone book and make you cry. As we look back at Sinatra's life, we often focus on the scandals, the movies, the lovers. But moments like this reveal the true character of the man. A man who was fiercely loyal, secretly insecure, and undeniably brilliant. He fought for his respect every single day, and when push came to shove, he didn't use his fists. He used his art. If this story moved you, if it made you respect the man behind the music a little more, please subscribe for new stories. And before you go, hit the like button for Sarah, the brave student who stood up when everyone else sat down. Frank Sinatra's legacy isn't just in the records. It's in the lesson that excellence is the best revenge. He didn't argue with Moretti. He outperformed him. He stripped away the artifices and stood naked in his talent. And that, in the end, is why we still listen. That is why, decades later, when the world feels noisy and chaotic, we put on a Sinatra record and feel, just for a moment, that everything is under control. Because he didn't just sing the songs, he lived them. And on that October night in New York, he proved that no matter how many times they count you out, if you have the goods, you can always silence the room. Subscribe for new stories, and we'll see you in the next chapter of the legend.